much for joining me today at the Hybrid Music Lab. I'm sure all of you are very tired after a long day of socializing and many cool talks and panels. So this is a space where we can, I invite you all to come back to yourselves, ground yourself in the present, and I will also like to give a bit of context before I do the performance. So the performance I'm going to be showcasing today is called Like Water, Like Clouds, and this project began as my master's thesis during my time at NYU's IMA Low-Res program in 2024. I graduated earlier this year in June, and this is where I explored integrating physical sensors and sound through participatory practices, and culminated in this research-based performance ritual. So Matthias already introduced a bit about me, but again, my work explores the intersections of shamanism, posthumanism, sustainability, collective sound experiences. I've been curating events and more recently sound healing rituals and spaces for people to feel more connected and empathetic towards each other. And here's just some of the other things that I do. I've met some of you maybe at Musical Frontiers last year, this past year, and the year before, and I am also a DJ. I do visual arts, 3D, creative direction, really all kinds of things, exploring generative technologies. Earlier this year with my album Kunst Kaput, and I am currently traveling a lot, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So the core of this project began when I was researching about being soft and what tenderness means. I was doing this master's program. It's a one-year master's, and I've just come out of undergrad. So I've been doing school for, I don't even know, like 20 years or something now. And I realized that I'm very hard on myself. I'm a perfectionist. I grind really hard, and I just never stop. I think it's like an ADHD thing. But I really wanted to create an artistic practice where I slowed down and was more intentional about the process of art making rather than the final result. And I was reading this book by Annika Hanstein Zora called Tenderness as Rage. I can't quite remember the title right now, but there's this quote. It's called, she says, "Tenderness is the practice of holding deep, slow, and intentional presence with my body mind and our collective body minds." So I started exploring what it means to create architectures or ephemeral spaces through sound, and I was also reading Micah Silver's Figures in Air. If anybody has read it, it's a really good book. And in this book, Silver talks about the concept of sound as social architecture, which addresses how sound shapes and is shaped by human behavior, social space, and collective experiences, explicitly framing sound as an organizing, structuring, and relational force in lived environments. Silver proposes that sound environments and interventions can destabilize conventional boundaries and comfort zones, using transience, ambiguity, and spatial unpredictability to unsettle listeners and provoke new forms of presence. I think if you were here for Jason's talk earlier, he also mentioned some of these points. And central to Silver's theory is the notion that listening is an embodied dynamic practice, one that requires the subject to be alert, open, and responsive to fluctuating soundscapes rather than passively consuming them. I've been discovering that practices such as deep listening and attunement foster mindfulness and self-awareness, dissolving rigid separations between self, environment, and others. And this cultivates a sensibility in which presence is attuned to shared temporality and affect. Silver's architectural metaphor emphasizes process as lived, always incomplete, and always co-constituted by its participants, which is all of you. And as a witness in this ritual, audiences become a part of co-creating the energy fields in which the process is always in flux. Participatory sound art, in Silver's formulation, invites diverse interpretations and relational exchanges, foregrounding process, reciprocity, and heterogeneity as core values, which is what this work strives to do. This is a photo of my mom and my grandparents and my uncle back in their village in China. And so they are Hakka Chinese immigrants, which means that my grandparents were actually born in Indonesia, and for many generations, their family and our ancestors lived in Indonesia. And then during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, they moved back to China, and that's where my mother was born. And to me, this Hakka identity creates a sense of uprootedness. There's no place that I really call home. I was born in Canada. I live in Berlin now, and everywhere I go, I feel constantly in flux. And so creating this temporal social architecture through sound has been my way of finding home and finding the people that I relate to the most. And so why did I pick Chinese calligraphy? Well, it might be obvious to some of you, but maybe not. And I began to explore different cultural practices rooted to my Chinese Hakka heritage. And I came across Chinese calligraphy just because it's such a beautiful art form, and at the same time, Chinese characters are based on pictographs. And so it's sort of this universal language that even if you can't really read Chinese, which I actually cannot, you're still able to see the beauty and the energy or the qi that is embedded inside of the painting itself. And I think there's so much richness and depth within Chinese calligraphy. Sometimes we call it a soft martial art, and it holds these organic structures of life that you really see the energy of the painter be transformed onto the canvas in real time, which then becomes this living, breathing artifact of the process. Here's a book here. So Tenderness, a Black Queer Meditation on Softness and Rage. And through my thesis research, I developed this question, which is, how can we view softness as a pre-existing condition within music technology and architecture? For me, softness exists as an energy in nature, and our body-minds, it requires us to tune into what is already inside of us and allow us to be present. This presentation is actually from a much longer artist talk that I did earlier in New York, where I talk about the different elements of softness that are embedded within this performance, including in the sound, the movement, and also the code itself. I think when we think about code, we don't often think about soft architectures, but code itself is a reflection of physics, and physics and nature is inherently soft. And so I want to find how we can recreate dynamic human-computer interactions which allow us to bring the softness out into these subtle nuances. This led me to develop this instrument, which currently is called the sonochrome, and it is essentially a gesture-based paintbrush instrument. I created this is the second iteration actually. The first iteration was very janky and it broke very quickly after the first performance. But I have a gesture sensor embedded with a Xiao ESP32, and it's sending Wi-Fi to my laptop, which is then being processed through Max and then running into Ableton, where I also have created a backing track for the live performances. This instrument actually came out of an earlier iteration of a performance called Chromesthesia, which I did in 2023, also at NYU as an undergrad. And I was developing an instrument that used color detection as a MIDI trigger. And I was inspired by Neil Harbison, who is supposedly the first cyborg. He's a colorblind cyborg who has an antenna on his head, and when the sensor detects different colors, he's able to hear those as tones in his mind. And so he started composing music in this way, and I wanted to recreate a kind of live painting performance that mimics that. And so what is happening inside of Max here is a sort of variation on 3D vector synthesis, using the XY axis and controlling the pentatonic scale, so the notes going up and down, and then the Y axis is the octave. And then the Z axis, when I kind of flick the brush up, you'll hear these beautiful reverbs, which really maps to the gesture of the sound and the space in the performance. And then on top of that, I've been experimenting a lot with spatial audio. Earlier this year, I was at CTM Mono's Welding AI Lab, and I've been working more and more with spatial audio as a medium. And so I'm also sending, using the gyroscope data, XYZ positions to MIDI mappings in Envelope for Live, and then that is then creating the spatializations of the instrument in this space, so you'll actually hear it in quadraphonics today. And in the past couple months, I've done this performance. I've taken it on tour in China, in Hong Kong, more recently in New York and the Netherlands, and here in Berlin. And in December, I'm going to be going to Goa. Well, I'm leaving tomorrow for Goa, and in December, I'm going to be doing a contact improv residency and working with dancers to continue to develop this interaction between movement and sound to create more emphasis on these subtle nuances. That's all the talking, so now I'm going to do the performance for you all. my breath. Most of the time, I start this performance with a guided meditation. Today, I wanted to give more context, so we cut that part out. But usually, I think the guided meditation is a really great way for people to ground and come into their bodies, and it's also good for myself because usually before this, I'm running around, setting everything up, and so I'm a little bit really in my head. And so doing it feels very meditative, and I feel as I in this state longer and longer, I just become more in this trance state with the painting and the sound, and I just feel my body moving with the music in a way that almost creates a biofeedback loop. And I am also so I'm writing the same character over and over again. It's the character she, which means breath. And so it's a reminder to myself as well that every time I write it, it's one breath. And so it's one line, one breath. And so a lot of it is just focusing on my breathing and the